Hi, everyone. The Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So, I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today I want to talk about some additional 9/11 signs, but also talk about how 9/11 relates to every single day of Sukkot, and we'll talk about that because that's very important. Um, at least the Sukkot this year. And so it's a lot of information, so feel free to take it in parts or fast forward, um, to the parts that interest you. But hopefully, um, it will encourage you and hopefully it will help you to see that Messiah is at the door. Okay. Okay. So 9/11. So the original 9/11 was 9/11 2001, and that's where we get the term 9/11. Um, um, and of course, 911 means emergency. Okay, so definitely very interesting. Um, and so, what I really think for 9/11 is that God was sending us a message. And what I believe is that there are some prophetical shadows in the events that happened that day. And so the trick is to know what the symbolism means on that day. And I have some ideas, but I call myself the partial prophet because I'm not 100% sure. I won't, claim that I know it all. Um, but I'll let you know my ideas and then you could think about it. Um, and so, one of the things I wanted to point out about 9/11 2001 is that if you add up those numbers, it adds up to 5. Okay, so um, I think that's really symbolic because I think 5 relates to Jesus, because Judah, Jesus is from the tribe of Judah, and Judah had 5 sons, and so I think the number 5 connects to Jesus. Okay, um, and then what's interesting about 9/11 is that we have 9, the number 9. And the number 9 means good. It also relates to 9 months of pregnancy. And I heard the rabbis talk about 6 versus 9, where 9 is the heavenly number, and then 6, would be the not heavenly number. So, it's interesting that the beast from the earth has the 666 connected to him. And they say, just even looking at how we write the numbers, the 6 has the circle is, down, um, toward the line, and then the 9, the circle is high up. Um, so even just the physical look of the numbers, um, show a difference between the two numbers. So I think that is very interesting. Um, and So 11 means, I believe it means judgment or hand of God. Um, and then what's interesting about 9/11 this year is that it's 20 years after 9/11. Okay. Um, and, so, we've already passed 9/11 and nothing happened on 9/11. Um, well, I mean, things happened on 9/11, but not like Jesus didn't come back on 9/11. Um, but I definitely think like because it was the 20th anniversary, there was a lot of remembering what happened in the original 9/11, and so I believe that God was using that day to remind us about what happened on that day. So we could see if you know um, maybe to remind us that maybe God is saying something about that day. Um, okay, um, so what I'm wondering is with just the term 9/11 is what I'm wondering is if the 9 represents the Messiah, okay? Um and I really think there's a lot of numbers that would connect to the Messiah. Um because he's the Alpha and Omega and the living, just he's very important. And so I think there could be a lot of numbers that connect to him. Um, and so, with 9 being the heavenly number, that would connect to Messiah. And then that would like kind of make him stand out from the beast from the earth, whose number is 6 or 666. Um, and and so what I'm wondering is, because we read in Revelation about the 7 kings, and then we read about an 8th king who's like coming back, who's part of the original 7 kings, but then kind of comes back, and then um, like this isn't explicitly mentioned in Revelation, but I'm wondering if Messiah is the 9th king. Okay. Um, that comes after these 8 kings. Okay. And um, and then what I'm wondering with 11 is that, if you could kind of parse it out to be 1 1, and if that connects to like the 2 thieves, that were crucified with Jesus on the cross. Okay. So that's what I'm wondering. Um, and so what I've talked about in my other videos is that I think Obama was the 5th king. Trump was the 6th king. And what I believe is that Trump could be the 8th king that's coming back. Um, and the reason why I believe that is that, well, so we saw Biden is kind of like the return of like 3rd term of Obama. Okay. And so what I believed is that God allowed Biden to get elected, um, so that um, all the work that Obama started, Biden is kind of like finishing. And so I believe that God allowed all that to happen so that we have the fullness of their sin. Okay. And, because basically now the Middle East is kind of a train wreck, especially Afghanistan. Um, but Biden is working on changing the face of the Middle East, changing, um, just America's relations with the world, with its allies. He's definitely got a plan there. He's doing stuff, and so I believe that he allowed them to have to, he allowed Biden to return, to finish the their sin, to live out the fullness of their sins. Okay, and so then what I believe is that we're gonna see Trump return so that he could live out the fullness of his sin, him and his people, him and his peeps. So that's what I believe. Um, and so that he would be the 8th, and then Messiah would be the 9th. Okay, and final king. Praise the Lord. um, and so then what's interesting about 9/11 is that we saw it involved the North Tower and the South Tower, okay, of the World Trade Center. Um, and so I think those are pretty loaded terms, prophetically speaking. And so what's interesting is that we have the nation of Israel was divided into the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. But we also saw in America how the Civil War was divided. America was divided, in the Civil War with North versus South. Okay. And so I think some of the symbolism that God's showing in 9/11 has to do with this North and this South. Okay. And so originally, when I was looking at the symbolism of 9/11, and I think I talk about this in some of my earlier videos, is that I really thought it was showing kind of the like what I was thinking is that America would be considered like the northern kingdom and Israel be considered the southern kingdom. And so I was thinking with these towers falling that 9/11 was showing the fall of those two countries. Okay. Um, But I've been kind of reevaluating that and wondering if it's more of a focus right now on the, like, because what I believe is that the fall of America, like, I believe America's going to end with a civil war. Okay. And then the Messiah is going to come back, or however that all works. Okay. And I mean, a lot of this, a lot of my beliefs come from things that I read in the scriptures. Okay. And it's difficult because I want to share all these verses with you, but there's just not enough time. And so I end up being a little more topical in my videos, maybe than scriptural, just because sometimes it's easier that way. Um, anyways, but it's not my preferred. I'd like to share the verses. It just takes a lot of work. But hopefully we're getting you some of them so you could see that I have some scriptural reasoning for why I believe what I believe. Okay. Um, so, um, so that's my current thinking on 9/11. Okay. And so what was interesting is that, okay, so last year when 9/11, so I did a video last year about 9/11. Okay. And I was really kind of focused on the fact that it was 19 years after 9/11. Because I just thought that was really significant, the number 19 and stuff, and especially because like in the 3 blood moons, the middle blood moon happened on the 19th of the month. um and so I thought it was going to be really significant, and actually I do think it was significant, but it wasn't. We didn't see the Messiah come back last year, but what I think we saw is the false Messiah doing his signs. And so, since I believe that Trump is the false Messiah, I believe he's the harlot of Babylon. Um, I believe that he connects to Peter in the scripture. Um, there's, I think, just a lot of prophetical stories that connect to Trump, because what I believe is that um, scripture tells us that there's going to be, okay, so scripture talks a lot about Elijah comes first and then the Messiah comes. Okay. um well, so what I'm thinking is that we're not we should not be looking for an Elijah that does like miracles like Jesus does, but that we have an Elijah type figure that comes and he does signs that people think are great miracles, but it's something that God uses to, you know, kind of test people to see if they're going to follow this man who's doing these signs, or if they're gonna hang tight and wait for the true Messiah. Okay, that's what I really believe. And because we see, Deuteronomy talks about, if you see someone doing miracles, but he's leading you to follow another god, don't follow this guy. Okay. And the problem that we have is people are seeing the things that Trump are doing, and they're falling away from following the true Messiah to follow Trump. They're putting all their faith and their hope in Trump. Okay. And so that's just really scary. And especially because I believe that the Trump followers right now are under, God has put on them a deluding influence. Okay. I mean, because when you hear them talk about Trump, they talk about him being the greatest guy in the world. And just talk about how he created peace in the Middle East, which he didn't create peace in the Middle East. And they're believing the lie that the election was stolen. They're believing the lie that COVID is not that bad, and that the vaccine is bad. And so when you hear them talk, and that January 6th was not an insurrection, they believe that lie, and that policemen didn't really get hurt on January 6th, and that the people on January 6th are just being unfairly persecuted, because they don't really believe that they were breaking the law or whatever. When you hear them talk about January 6th, it's sad, the delusions that they believe about January 6th. And so, so you could just tell when you hear these people that they're under this deluding influence. And I saw this really happen last year, where it was like all of a sudden, some of the people that I listened to on YouTube, um, and just it was, and some political people on the right, and like Fox News people, all of a sudden people just went crazy, okay, last year. And so what I really believe is that was when the deluding influence came on people, was last year, okay. um and so that's a prophecy that's been fulfilled, okay. um Anyway, so what was interesting last year was, so for 9/11, on the 19th anniversary of 9/11, that was when Trump made his second or third peace deal. It depends how you count it, okay? So if you're counting the deal of the century, really, I should say the third peace deal, because he had the quote unquote deal of the century, and then he had the UAE peace deal, and then on 9/11 was the Bahrain peace deal. And if I mentioned that right, yes. Um, and so I think that's really significant. Okay. So that happened on the 19-year anniversary. Okay. And then so we see in Revelation 19, in verse 2, it talks about God's judgments being true and righteous, for he has judged the great harlot who was corrupting the earth with her immorality, and he has avenged the blood of his bondservants on her. Okay. So like I said, I think the great harlot connects to Trump. Okay. And the immorality, I think these peace deals, well, especially the deal of the century, really stands out when you study the deal of the century. But, Trump was getting ready to divide the land. Fortunately, the Palestinians did not, become a part of that deal. Otherwise, he would have been dividing the land. But these other peace deals, it's still really kind of selling Israel out from under them. And the countries that are making these quote unquote normalization deals with Israel, um, they are motivated, to see the two-state solution. They're not in love with Israel like God, who people who follow God should be. Um, like we should love Israel because, um, it's God's nation. Um, and God has a plan for it, and we should love the Jewish people, and should want to see them on their land. Um, the countries that Trump was making deals with, they had um, their secondary, their motives. I mean, economic motives was definitely a big part of the peace, quote unquote peace deals, but also uh, they wanted Israel to deal with Iran because they didn't want to have to do the dirty work themselves of dealing with Iran. Um, but they also, mentioned, either right before they signed the peace deals or right after, of how they were interested in getting Israel divided up into the two states. So not really the type of people you should be making deals with. Okay, so So then what's interesting about this year with 9/11 is that when you add it up, you get the number 7. 9/11 2021 adds up to 7. Okay, which I think that's interesting because that connects 7. We all know it connects to completion. Okay, but also it could have been God could have been pointing towards Sukkot because Sukkot is a 7th-day feast day. I mean, it's actually an 9-day feast day, but it's talked about in the Bible as like a 7-day feast day. So that could have been what God was saying with the numbers there. So this year, 9/11 happened on Tishri 5, okay, which was Shabbat Shuvah. And, so this is why, I definitely think God was sending a message on 9/11 this year because he says, the Shabbat Shuvah is the Shabbat of return. And it comes from Hosea 14:2, where he says, "Return, O Israel, unto the Lord your God." Okay. So definitely interesting. So I wrote down 10-day warning before Sukkot Eve. So obviously we passed that, so you can ignore that part right now. So, but I mean, definitely a 10-day, pointing to Sukkot. Okay. Well, I mean, which is interesting because, you did have the 10 days of repentance that Shabbat, Shuvah, and 9/11 happened in the middle of the 10 days of repentance. So, anyways. And then, okay, so why did I put this in here? 9/17/2021. Oh, so I thought this was just another like 9/11 sign in this month. Is that if you took 9/17, um, it was the 11th of Tishri, so you could take the 9 from the September and the 11 from the Tishri, the Hebrew dates of the month, and get 9/11. Okay. And then what was interesting about 9/17 is that was when we had all the warnings about the Justice for J6 rally that was going to happen on the next day. Okay. And what's interesting to me about that is that Revelation 17 and 18 is about Babylon. Okay. So I think that's very interesting. Okay. So I put in here Revelation 17:1, where one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." Okay. And then in Revelation 18, it says, "After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird.'" Okay, so what's interesting is we see that term a lot. Well, I don't know how much in Revelation, where it says fallen, fallen is Babylon. And so it's interesting to have that verse kind of like right next to this picture of 9/11, because if the North Tower and the South Tower connect to America, so then it's like fallen, fallen, the North Tower fell, or the South Tower fell first and then the North Tower fell. Okay, so definitely I think there's a connection there. Okay. And so we'll talk about that. What's was interesting too about the 17th and the 18th is we saw a pattern in March of 2020. On March 11 in 2020 was when the pandemic was declared. Okay. And then on the 17th of March in 2020 was when all 50 states had COVID, and then the shutdown began on the 18th. So I was really kind of wondering if we were going to go into some kind of shutdown on the 18th. But what's kind of interesting about this Justice for J6 rally is that they kind of did go in to shut down in Washington D.C. You know, they put up all the fencing and stuff like that. And so I was kind of wondering about the connection to the story of Jericho, where it's in Jericho it says no one was coming in or out because of the fear of Israel. Okay, in the story of Jericho, in Joshua, in the book of Joshua. And you know, and so I was wondering if that was a prophetic shadow of you know, these Trump people in Washington D.C. So that's what I was wondering. You know, and so we're kind of seeing some of those patterns live out, that you know, and really kind of since January 6th, you know, like they actually had the fencing up in Washington D.C. for quite a while. Okay, you know, so there is kind of this fear of you know, these January 6 people or Trump followers, you know, that are keeping people really from kind of freely coming and going. Um, so definitely very interesting. Um, and okay, so then what do we got here? Okay, so what was interesting on 9/11 is, so we had the North Tower. It involved, you know, first the North Tower got hit by a plane, then the South Tower got hit by a plane, and then the South Tower fell, and then the North Tower fell. The Pentagon was also hit, and then later in the day, the World Trade Center 7 building fell. Okay. Um, and so one of the things that I was wondering, okay, so I was wondering if the two towers represent like the Civil War in America. And so what I was, with my research, I was thinking that, okay, how does this work out? What I think is that Biden and his followers are the southern part of the country, and then Trump and his followers are the northern part of the country. I think is how scripture works out. Okay, and the reason why I think that is because okay, so in the tabernacle, there was, so I don't have my notes here, but in the tabernacle, the seven branched lampstand was, okay, let me see if I have this right. Okay, so I think the table of showbread was on the south side. Okay, so I'm getting confused because I'm a little dyslexic here, but it has to do with the table of the showbread, whatever side it was on. Okay, so the table of showbread, the reason why I connect that to Trump is because they lay out the bread into 2 rows of 6. Okay. And then I connect the lampstand to Biden because it's a 7 branch lampstand, and what we saw is Biden is involved with G7. Okay. And so actually the description of the beast from the sea talks about having 7 horns. Okay. And they talk about one of the horns. It, you know, the Bible talks about one of the horns. Okay, so I'm trying to look it up. One of the horns, this is in Revelation 13. The beast from the sea. Okay. Oh, actually it's not 7 horns, it's 7 heads. Okay. And then one of the heads I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. Okay. And so the reason why I connect that is because you have with the seven heads, you had with G7, you have the seven countries. Okay. And it's kind of like America, um, well, like, Obama, um, he got the fatal head wound because he lost his authority. Okay. But then it was like almost as if his head was healed with Biden coming back. Okay. So then G7 was able to continue some of the work that they were doing when Obama was around. Okay. Because remember, Trump, he didn't really work with some of these countries, because he wasn't supporting the climate change stuff. I mean, some of it was good. Don't support the climate change stuff, and some of the other things they were trying to accomplish, he didn't get behind. Um, and so that's how I get the division of the North and the South in this country. Okay. Um, and and then the Pentagon being hit. Okay, so Pentagon is the five-sided building. Okay, and so that's why I'm wondering if that represents the nation of Israel. Okay, and so that there's still you know a picture of Israel falling in 9/11, but it relates to the Pentagon. Okay, although the Pentagon didn't really fall, it got hit by an airplane and there was a fire. Um, but I'm just wondering if that connects to Israel. And then the World Trade Center 7 fell, and that could connect to the nations falling, like the nations or G7. I mean, either like the G7 nations falling, or um, like the Jewish people kind of talk about like 70 nations kind of representing all the nations in the world. Okay, the number 70. So I'm wondering about if WTC 7 connects to the 70 nations. Um, anyways, so I put in some information about Crystal Knock because obviously very interesting because that was November 9th and 10th, but the way they write the dates, in Europe, it looks like 9/11. Okay. But that was very interesting because that was really kind of the Jewish people consider that like the start of their persecution in World War II. Okay. So definitely very interesting. Um, and anyways, it was 62 years, 10 months, 3 days until 9/11, 2001 from Kristallnacht. They called Kristallnacht the night of broken glass or windows, which I think is interesting because I think Messiah is the door and Trump is the window. Okay. Um, so, anyways, definitely interesting. Um, So what's interesting too about 9/11 is that there was 4 planes hijacked. Okay, so what I'm wondering is um, if that connects to. So what was kind of interesting this month is that we had on September 15th, SpaceX um, sent up 4 amateur astronauts into space in their Dragon capsule. Okay. Um, so that was kind of interesting because let me think. Yeah, that was 4 days after 9/11. And so the reason why I bring that up is I wonder if it connects to the 4. Um, I have the verses later on where it talks about release the 4 angels that are bound at the Euphrates River. Okay. So I'm wondering if that's what the 4 planes connects to. Because when you think of planes, they fly in the sky. So we had these civilians in space. When the four angels, we think of angels flying around in heaven. And so anyways, so that's why I'm wondering if they're all connected. So anyway, so I was trying to think of what the airplanes hitting the buildings represented. I mean, obviously when the towers fell, that's a good picture of, you know, um, you know, nations falling or kingdoms falling, or like the fall of Babylon so I was wondering about, okay, so when the airplanes hit first, what that represented. Um, and so um, I was kind of connecting to, okay, so the North Tower. Okay, so here, this reminds me of who I decided was what. So I decided that Trump connects to the North Kingdom, the North Tower, and then Biden connects to the South Kingdom or the South Tower. And okay, so one thing about the planes hitting the buildings is that I kind of think with Trump being a messianic figure, and we've seen this also with Biden, where that they kind of like present himself as messianic figures. Okay. And so that's a possibility of what these planes hitting the buildings represent, because the buildings hit near the planes hit near the top of the buildings. And and so I kind of talk about this later too. I have the verses about like Lucifer, or I forget what else he was called, kind of, you know, we'll go see what the verses say because I don't remember exactly what it says. But I also wonder too if the plane, okay, because when the planes hit, they cause destruction. Okay, so I'm wondering if the North Tower getting hit first represented like Trump's abomination that causes desolation. And I'm kind of wondering, so what is Trump's AOD? Maybe it's the deal of the century. Maybe it's that he did set up the Taliban deal, okay? And then we had Biden came and he finished the deal, okay? And it really caused destruction, okay? And continuing destruction. I mean, it's not done. These terrorists are just, um, you know, um, Biden gave them these weapons and power, and so just um, they have power now to cause destruction. Okay, um, so that's what I'm wondering, and so I put in the times, um, you know, um, because I think like the times the things happen, the flights, with the North Tower, it was American Airlines 11. Um, so that number 11 there. Um, the South Tower, United Airlines, so that was United Airlines that hit. And 175 adds up to 13, I believe. Yes. And so, I definitely think that the number 13, I mean, I knew it connected to Obama. 13, the number 13, the number 23 connected to Obama. And then so definitely I think we could connect it to Biden too. Um, and then let's see. So we see with the Pentagon was hit at 9:37, so that adds up to 19. You know, um, you know, so um anyways, so like I said, I don't, you know, I mean, this studying all the numbers and stuff, is really an art in itself for 9/11. Um, but we'll just try to give an overview. And then at 10:03, we had United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in a field. I'm not totally getting what the the airplane crashing in the field, what that represents. Um, but I don't know if like maybe it's kind of a double of the picture where we have the North Tower and the South Tower fall, and then we have like the fire in the Pentagon and the fire in the field, maybe represent, um, you know, like maybe the same picture kind of um, like the North Tower and the South Tower. Um, except that maybe like the Pentagon being hit, represents, Israel burning, and then Flight 93 crashing connects to America burning, maybe something along those lines. So that's what we got going on there. Um, so on this slide, I was okay. So this actually came up because originally I was wondering about the 18th anniversary of 9/11. Because we have these verses about the 18 in scripture, but I'm realizing that what I believe now is that the 18 is representing the 666. Okay. So what's interesting, it says in Luke, Jesus said, "Or do you suppose that those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them were worse culprits than all the men who live in Jerusalem?" Okay. Um, so what I think is that 18 connects to the 666, and then we have the tower that reminds us of Babylon. Um, so when Jesus says, unless you repent, you'll be like, these people, you know, too. And then we have this woman that had a sickness for 18 years and she was bent double. Okay. Um, so, um, so I think that could be a picture of America, with the two thieves, um, or the North Tower and the South Tower bent double, you know. Um, basically that America has a sickness because we have this Trump figure right now and we have this Biden figure right now. Okay. Basically creating problems for America. Um, what's also interesting about 18 is that what I believe is because of Trump's deal of the century, America was under judgment. And, so basically what happened was we were like dealing with the coronavirus for 18 months. Okay. Um, and because 311, well, so we read about beauty treatments in the book of Esther. Okay. And at first, I was focusing on the 12 months, because it was, they talk about the beauty treatments being 12 months. But then if you go on and read about it, 6 months with oil of myrrh and then 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women, you could actually make that say 18. So like 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with spices, and then 6 months with cosmetics for women. That could be hidden in there. Okay. Um, and um, but what was interesting about 12 months after the deal of the century, like pretty close to it, it was 11 months, 24 days, was when Biden was sworn in. 18 months. Okay, so 311 was when um, COVID was declared a pandemic. And so it's interesting that 18 months after that is 9/11 of this year. Okay. Um, And so I kind of feel like we finished the beauty treatments. Okay. And so like what I'm thinking with the beauty treatments is that, I mean, partly there's judgment for the deal of the century. Okay, so that's why we had to deal with COVID. But also that God was using it to prepare his people for the coming of the Messiah. Okay. Um, getting the bride ready for the Messiah to come. Okay. So, some other 9/11 pictures that we saw, what was really interesting is that we had um okay, so in New York, okay, so this happened January 15th, 2009. Um, is is you know what do they call it? The miracle on the Hudson. Um, so this was where the pilot, solely the pilot, um, they were flying, okay, and um, the plane hit birds. Like they hit a lot of birds. At least in the movie, they make it look like a lot of birds. I mean, enough that they lost both engines, okay. And so then solely the pilot had to, just like make a quick educated decision of how to land this plane safely, and he ended up landing it on the Hudson. Okay. So what I really think, so I definitely think there's a picture that God's showing in what happened here, because what's interesting, if you watch the movie, um Sully was definitely seen as a big hero. Okay. And what the people in New York liked about it is that it was like, I mean, they made the comment in the movie, it was nice to have like something positive happen with an airplane, you know, because no one died, everyone was saved in this, incident. And so, what I think is that this event was kind of like a contrast to 9/11. Okay. And so I definitely think God's sending us a picture here too. Okay. So what's interesting about Sully is that, his name, I mean, that's not his full name, but that's 5 letters for Sully. And then what's interesting is Hanks is 5 letters. Okay. It happened on January 15, 2009. Well, you could take the one, the one from January, the one from the 15, and that's 11, and then you could take the 9 and the 2, and that's 11, but you have a 5 in the middle. Okay. So if 9 represents Jesus, but 5 could also represent Jesus, so it's like you have 11, 5, 11. um it still involved, oh, so it involved birds, which was interesting. Okay. So what I was wondering with this, oh, and then the movie was released on 9/9/2016, and then you could get 999 there, so maybe definitely God's pointing at a picture of Jesus, okay? Because what's interesting is that in the Bible, um, so in the Bible it talks about God being like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young. He spreads his wing and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. Okay. So look at this picture. Like, this is probably a picture from the movie, but representing what happened on that day. Um, you see like all the people standing on the wings. Okay. And so this could be a picture of the Messiah, with his people on the wings. Okay, so because they talk about the eagle, um, would carry its young on its wings, because it flies high above everybody else. And so to protect its young, it puts it above its wings, whereas some of the other birds will carry, um, their they're young, either in their, like, I guess with their legs or something like that. Um, um, but the eagle protects its young by carrying it on its wings. Um, and what's interesting is that we read in Revelation, we read about the woman that goes into the wilderness. Um, okay, I have that right here. Let's see. Okay, it says the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place. So that makes the woman like an eaglet, okay, where she was nourished for times and half a time from the presence of the serpent, okay. And so, what I was wondering about this picture of the two wings of the great eagle is that what I'm wondering is that um, if the two wings kind of represents where you're either on Jesus's wing or you're on Trump's wing, is what I'm kind of wondering. Okay, and we kind of see that picture like in the sheep and the goats, where the sheep are on the right and the goats are on the left. Okay. So that's what I'm wondering about that picture. Trump Tower. Okay, so that kind of an interesting repeat of 9/11. What was interesting about this day? Okay, so this happened April 7, 2018. There was 6 firefighters injured, so I highlighted 6. It happened on Nissan 22, which is 11 times 2. So the blaze broke out on the 50th floor of the tower. Okay, so like I said, 5 connects to Judah. What was interesting about the date, April 7, 2018, is that if you add that all together, you get 11 plus 11 equals 22. So that was interesting because 9/11/2020 happened on Elul 22. Okay, so I'm kind of wondering if, we have kind of 22 being connected to Trump because of his 9/11, that happened last year. Okay, when he made his third peace deal, quote unquote peace deal. Okay, so the third blood moon, when Trump made his Golan announcement, was 1 day shy of 50 weeks after this fire. Okay. So that was kind of interesting. And then 3/17/19 was 11 months, 11 days after this fire. Okay. That was St. Patrick's Day, which was 1 year before the 50th state had coronavirus. Okay. I think these are all connected. The 50th floor, the 50th state with coronavirus. I see a connection with March 17th, that was St. Patrick's Day, with St. Patrick's Day maybe connected to Trump because of the 3-sided shamrock. So definitely interesting. So I thought while I had this picture of his tower, I would throw in the picture of Trump Heights that Netanyahu dedicated to Trump over in Israel. Okay. And we read in Genesis 11, it says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they've begun to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so 9, 14, and 15. Oh, okay. So what's interesting this year is, okay, so last year, on the 15th of September last year, 2020, was when Trump had, okay, so I kind of wrote this wrong because I should have wrote 9, 15, 14, and 15, 2021, because it was on 9/15 in 2020 was when, okay, but I don't know if you remember, but Trump had his peace, quote unquote, peace signings on the 15th, okay, and that was when he brought UAE and Bahrain to Washington, and they had a ceremony where they signed the peace deals. Um, and so it was interesting because this year on the 14th and the 15th, they had celebrations because it was the 1 year anniversary, um, of these peace signings. Okay. So, Trump may not be president, but his influence is still there. Okay. And so what I thought was interesting, okay, so like the 14th would be, 1 year, um, like 350, how many days in a year? 365 days later. And then um, the 15th would be the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary because of the date. Okay. And so what was interesting is we read in the Bible about Nebuchadnezzar, and it says 12 months later he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected and said, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?" Okay. And then it goes on to say, while the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven saying, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, sovereignty has been removed from you." Okay. Um, so we saw that Nebuchadnezzar fell because of his arrogance. Okay. Um, so what else was interesting this year on 9/15, September 15th, was Yom Kippur, and that is when God picks, or God has the high priest pick two goats, okay, and one of them gets sent into the wilderness, and one of them gets killed, okay, which is what we also see that same picture in the cupbearer and the baker. Um, the cupbearer gets to live and the baker gets killed. Okay. And so what I was thinking is that on Yom Kippur this year, I think that God decided that, um, Biden is going to lose his power. Okay. You know, um, I mean, we already see Biden kind of like, okay, like his arrogance, um, where he's talking about, like, he was like boasting about like ending the war in Afghanistan, um, you know, which is just ridiculous because um, it just is, because the Taliban, and Al Qaeda and ISIS are like, I don't know, maybe worse now, Um, anyways, so, basically what I think is that I think it's highly possible on Yom Kippur this year that God decided that Biden's going to lose his power, and then, but he's going to allow, so Trump's going to be like the cupbearer that is going to be able to come back and do some of the same stuff that he was doing before. Okay. But it's going to be very short. Okay. Um, because, then at some point, anyways, whatever. I mean, he's going to be cut down really quickly. Um, so that's what I think that shows us. Okay, so the Notre Dame fire um, happened April 15th to the 16th. Okay, so we keep seeing kind of a repeat of those 15, the 15 number. Um, and that really kind of connects to the first day of Sukkot, or like the first day of Passover. I was wondering about the Notre Dame fire, if that was the 11th month warning about the coronavirus. Okay. On the what was interesting was that April 17th. Okay, so what's interesting about 2019 is that, oh no, I guess that adds up to 12. Um but it happened on Nissan 10 and Nissan 11. Okay. Um, oh, which, yeah. Anyways, so, yeah, I mean, I didn't know if we can consider like Trump's 9/11 would be like the 10, and then this 9/11 is the 11. Anyways, whatever. But this fire happened 11 months before the coronavirus. Um, and then on April 17th, someone tried to set fire to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And so that was um, 11 months before the shutdown that started on March 18th. Okay. Um, and then, so what did I write in here? That this fire happened 29 months before 9/15/21. Um, anyways, that would be interesting because 29 always kind of reminds me of 11 too, because you add 9 plus 2, um, you know, or like if 9 represents Jesus, then you have the two thieves on the cross. Um, so I'm not totally sure, what was 29 months before. Yeah, I guess that would have been these fires. Um, so Notre Dame means Our Lady. Um, so this tower falling, is it symbolic of the fall in America or fall of America? Is it symbolic of the fall of America like happening in Afghanistan? What's interesting is France, it happened in France. France represents the number 6. Um, it was 69 weeks before the United Arab Emirates peace deal. Um, anyways, but after this fire, the spire fell and there's 2 towers left. Okay, so definitely could be pictures of these last days. So we have passed then, the fall of America, or like the abomination of desolation happening. And so then the next thing we could look for is, God dealing with these 2 towers. Okay. So Kabul fell to the Taliban on August 15th. See that 15 number keeps showing up everywhere. 28 months, 122 weeks after this fire. Um, let's see. The Yeah. So the St. Patrick's, someone trying to set fire to the St. Patrick's Day was, like the third day, where you had the Notre Dame fire for 2 days, and then the St. Patrick's Cathedral fire would have been on the third day. Fortunately, they they weren't able to. It it didn't work for some reason. I don't know if someone caught him. I don't remember that story now. Anyways, but that connects to the third sided shamrock. I mean, New York City connects to, 3, the number 3, NYC. Then we have this Gothic cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul in Nantes Cathedral. So I think just the name of this cathedral kind of connects to, it's the picture of the northern and the southern kingdoms. Okay, because like Paul considered himself the apostle to the Gentiles, and Peter considered himself the apostle to the Jews. So that does connect to that picture in scripture of the northern and the southern kingdoms, Jew and Gentile. Um, um, so this um, cathedral is from the 15th century. Um, Same thing again, where Nantes, I mean, another city in France, so we got that number 6. This happened July 18, 2020. If you add those numbers together, it adds up to 11. Okay. Um, so, so it's interesting when God adds different elements to these pictures. Okay. Because like I'm not totally sure what the fire in the middle represents, but maybe the fire in the middle kind of represents this fire, like the fall of America. And then, and then you're left with the two towers. Okay. And then, so with this picture here, we see a ladder put up, so the firefighters can fight the fire, but there was also, what do you call this thing? Um, like the forklift. Um, and so, so I put in this verse about Jacob's ladder, and then it said, he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Okay. Okay, so Jacob's ladder in itself is a 9/11 picture. Okay, because you have the rungs in the middle, and then you have the two, like ones on the two sides, you know, um, um, or the two sides look like the number 11. Okay, and so if you understand the picture of Jacob's ladder, I believe it connects to Matthew 20:16, where Jesus says, so the last shall be first and the first last. And so I think that term connects to the last days. And so basically what happens in the last days is that um, we have angels ascending or descending. Okay, so like the firstborn, God does a reversal of fortune. And the people that are at the bottom, God raises them to the top. And the people that are at the top, God demotes them to the bottom. Okay. Or they actually die or whatever. So that's the picture of the ladder. Okay. And then, with the bent forklift, that's, similar to the lady that's bent for 18 years. Okay. Um, excuse me. I'm all congested. Okay, so I'm wondering if the ladder would represent Jesus, um, you know, and or like and or Paul, who's a messianic figure, obviously. And then, but we have, and then if the bent forklift would represent Trump, and or Peter, who Peter is, the one who denied Jesus 3 times. Okay. And so the bent forklift is not fully extended. Okay, so the ladder's on the right, the forklifts on the left. Okay, so like Jesus goes fully up into heaven, but Trump doesn't fully go up to heaven. Um, so that kind of represents like the goats on the left. Okay, so those are those pictures. Back to the Future, we got the okay, so this is the Back to the Future movie. Okay, at 1:16 in the morning, but if you turn it around, it looks like 9/11. He go, okay, Marty, the lead character or whatever, goes to the Twin Pines Mall. Okay. Um, and then what's interesting is that then he goes back into the past, runs over a pine, and then at 1:33 in the morning, it's now called the Lone Pine Mall. Okay. So Marty returns to the mall at 1:33. The mall is now called the Lone Pine Mall because Marty knocked down one of the trees. Okay, so I thought that was interesting because um, what I'm wondering is, okay, so Marty returns to the mall right when Doc is being shot by the Libyans. Okay, so what I'm wondering is Marty is a messianic type figure. Like, does he represent Trump, who returns when there's trouble with terrorists killing Americans, which is what is happening right now in Afghanistan? and then who knocks down the other pine, okay, the other tower, okay. Do you see, did you follow that? Um, because Marty runs over the tree. Okay, so it is Trump. And what's interesting is that we have Marty like returning to the mall. Okay, and so I think that could represent like Trump coming back. Okay, um, what we see with 1335 is that that represents 9/15/2020. Okay, because that's when the two peace deals were being signed. That's the 1335th day of Trump. Okay, um, so to me, it's just fascinating that when you look at this picture here, you see 133, but you got Marty walking on the side of the sign, and Marty is the five. Okay, there's five letters in Marty. There's five letters in McFly, his last name. Um, what was interesting is that Marty wanted more time so he could save Doc. Okay, so that's another picture of like Trump gets more time. Trump gets a chance to return to finish the fullness. Okay. And then when you look at this picture here, you see, I mean, it's the 9/11 reflection. Okay. Because in the headlights, um, you know, the reflection in the headlights, the reflection of the lights off the truck, Doc with his hands up, is the 9/11 picture. Um, the two hands represent like the two towers. So is God sending some messages in this movie? I think so. Um, so definitely very interesting. Um, and even the pine, the trees. I mean, that's in scripture too, you know. Um, so definitely God's sending messages. And then, this comes from the Back to the Future movie too. Um, so definitely very symbolic of, if you see fire on the left and fire on the right, you're either out of time, or out of time could also represent, Jesus, who, is kind of like a little out of time, or I don't know how to say that so it sounds good, but kind of like he's not really, um, he's kind of more supernatural kind of thing, person. Um, if that makes sense to you. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and then so this is from the second Back to the Future movie, um, which I thought was kind of interesting because so Back to the Future is a trilogy. Okay, I think that can connect to. I kind of think sometimes in the Bible we read about the 3 days. The 3 days, I wonder if they connect to the last three um, presidents, and so Obama, Trump, Biden. Okay. Um, and so what's interesting is that this is the second movie. This comes from the second movie. And so I think it's showing us a picture of Trump. Okay. And so what we have is Biff's tower. Okay. So I think Biff is like a Trump figure. Okay. And then what we see is like in this um, um, well, so actually, like this is the third time frame in the second movie. Um, what's interesting about the second movie, it was released on 11/22, so keep seeing those 11 numbers and the 22 numbers. Um, and so it was the third time frame because they had the present, the future, and the alternate reality. Okay, so I was wondering if it connected to, if the third time frame connects to the time of Biden. Okay, Daniel's three friends could represent third time frame: Doc, Marty, Jennifer, Obama, Trump, Biden. Okay, young Jennifer meeting old Jennifer could have been a time paradox. Okay, so two Jennifers could represent the second time frame of Biden. They could also represent the second time frame of Trump. Okay. What's interesting about Biff in this movie is, I don't know if you could see that because it's kind of small here, but Biff welcomes the bikers. Okay, in front of this Biff Tower, it says, "Welcome bikers." Okay. So what we've seen with Trump is that, like Trump said, the QAnon are good people. He said that the January 6th people are good people. He wasn't really willing to like very clearly speak out against the white nationalists. So definitely a man of lawlessness that likes the law, welcomes the lawless people. As long as they like him, he likes them, basically. And then it's interesting because, like, in this third time frame, we just see chaos. Okay, that Dr. Marty returned to this time frame, and it's not like it used to be. It's just chaos. Okay, people shooting, just rioting in the street, bikers in the street. So definitely very interesting. So the burning bush is also a 9/11 picture. The angel appears in the midst of the bush, which is also a picture of the fiery furnace in Daniel. We have Samson with the two pillars. We have Jesus on the cross. I already talked about that. The nativity scene, Jesus, Mary, Jesus with Mary and Joseph on the one side. So this picture is just repeated all throughout scripture, but then God, repeats it in our world too. God is definitely trying to say something. And like I said, here's the 3 supermoons, which I think is the 9/11 picture. The first supermoon and the last supermoon happened on the 21st of the month. Oh, no, I guess it happened. So 2019 actually adds up to 12. I was thinking that might have added up to 11. But the first, okay, so what I really think with this picture is that I think Trump is the wolf moon and Biden is the worm moon. Okay. So what we see is that we have wolves howl at the moon. Okay. And so I think Trump could be the moon, and then like Jesus is the sun. And that we kind of have, I think that God could be using that picture, in scripture, because it talks in creation, it talks about God creating the 2 great lights, one to light up the day and one to light up the night. So obviously Trump would be the moon in the night and Jesus is the sun in the day. So what was interesting with the wolf moon is that was also a lunar eclipse. Okay. Oh, so this picture actually might be the lunar eclipse. Okay. Anyways, but yeah, it was kind of interesting that it's got 3 moons there. Definitely kind of interesting. Yeah, so I'm wondering if Trump followers are the wolves that howl at the moon. Okay. This wolf moon happened this 2-year second year first day of Trump. It was the new year for trees. Okay, so I'm wondering, even in the garden where you have the 2 trees, I'm wondering if that's the same picture too, where the tree of life is the picture of the Messiah and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil connects to Trump. Okay. And, the big question is, what tree are you going to eat from? And then what was interesting about the first wolf moon is that happened 11 months after Billy Graham died. Um, um, and then with the worm moon, um, so is Biden the worm? Okay, so it says God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day and it attacked the plant and it withered. So I was wondering if Trump was the plant and then Biden is the worm that comes and attacks the plant and it withers. Okay. Um, and then what was interesting with the worm moon is it happened on Purim, which the Purim story connects to the Haman figure, which could definitely be a picture of Biden. Um, because Haman ends up making a deal that gets the Jewish people killed, just like Biden made a deal with the Taliban that gets Americans killed. Okay, so he's definitely a Haman type figure. Um, let's see, it happened the spring day before Golan announcement. Um, well, what was interesting too about the worm moon is that 13 months after Billy Graham died, and then we also saw with Barron Trump too, he turned 13. I don't know if it was on that exact day or near the day, but anyways, we see the 13 number, which I told you connects to Obama, and then by proxy connects to Biden. Um, anyways, and so the super moon in the middle was the snow moon. I definitely connect snow to Jesus. Okay. Um, and then what's interesting is it happened on Purim Katan, which is kind of like a hidden Purim. Um, and then the middle supermoon was the biggest supermoon, and that happened 12 months after Billy Graham died. So we see that number 12, that connects to the 12 tribes of Israel. Um, so that's what I'm wondering about those. Okay, so then this year, God added a few more 9/11 pictures, and so we had the Surfside, Florida condo collapse. Okay, if you watch the video of, okay, so I think it was, I don't remember exactly now. I think it might have been CNN's picture of the Twin Towers falling on 9/11. If you watch the the Florida condo collapse, it looks very eerily similar to the 9/11 Twin Towers collapse. Okay, because even though, I mean, it's not like two towers fell in this building, but it was like two sides kind of fell um, in the Florida condo collapse. Um, I mean, you got to watch the video. Um, and so, what's interesting about the Surfside condo is that um, you still have that north south connection because um, there was there's a this was the Champlain Towers south, and then there's Champlain Towers north. Okay, and so I wrote in here south connects to Biden. Um, so was God giving us a picture of the falling of Biden? Okay, in this collapse. Okay, it happened on June 24th, 2021. If you add that all together, it adds up to 8. Um, It was a 12-story building. 98 people tragically died. Um, what was interesting is there's 136 units. Okay, so we see kind of that 13 number and we see that 6 number in there. Um, what's interesting is that it says alpha wrecking on the machinery. You see alpha like in big letters, where like Jesus is the alpha and the omega. Um, um, and then on ABC News, when they were showing the wreckage in their news photos, I think it was police cars that you would see that had 9/11 on the police cars. Okay. So definitely God was trying to point this out as a 9/11 picture. Okay. Um, what was interesting is that there was a 15-year-old boy. His name was Jonah. He was rescued from the rubble. Okay. So a connection to the story of Jonah. Oh, which is interesting because um, Jonah is the book that the Jewish people read on Yom Kippur. Okay, and so that was very interesting that he was 15 years old because on September 15th was Yom Kippur Eve this year. Okay, and like I said, I think that God decided, you know, that he decided that Trump was gonna, I mean, not Trump, that Biden was going to be judged for his behavior because of Afghanistan and a bunch of the other stuff that he did. And he was going to lose his power, and then Trump was going to rise to power, is what I'm thinking. So, what was interesting is this condo collapse happened 80 days before 9/11. Okay. And then it's 85 days before 9/16, which is Yom Kippur. Oh, well, so actually it'd be 84 days before 9/15, because we read in the Gospel of Luke about the prophetess, or I don't know what they call her. Yeah, the prophetess in the temple when they brought Jesus in, when Jesus's parents brought him into the temple. There was a prophetess, and it talked about her. She, lived with her husband for 7 years, and then she was a widow till the age of 84. So that would connect to the 84 days before 9/16 of this condo collapse, which, yeah, anyways, so that was kind of interesting. And then obviously we had the fall in Afghanistan, or fall of Afghanistan. Well, so it was interesting. They kept saying on the news is that it was that Afghanistan fell to the Taliban in 11 days. And they said that on the news. I wasn't able to quite figure out what time frame they were considering, because it didn't quite match what I was counting. But it was just interesting that everyone was saying that. And then what's interesting is they showed this plane. This was when they were trying to evacuate people from Afghanistan, and look at the numbers on the plane. 1109. Definitely very interesting. The star I put in there to highlight 1109. That's not actually on the plane. So definitely think God's trying to show us something. What's also very interesting this year is the space flights. Okay. And we've had 3 space flights this year. So the very first one is definitely a very strong 9/11 picture, because what I thought was interesting is that you have the middle, like the 2 sides, like fall away, and then this Virgin capsule, kind of takes off and flies into space. Okay. So definitely like a picture of the last days where, Jesus is in the middle and he's going to fly to space, and, the 2 sides are going to fall away, which connects to the birth story with uh, Rebecca or Rachel. I always get it confused with the twins, where God says, there's 2 nations in your womb that will be separated from your body. And so I thought that was, this space flight was a very strong picture of that, story. And And then, so there was 3 space flights. What was interesting about the, so we already talked about the 4 civilians. So that was definitely very interesting. Um, oh, so what did I put in here? The Book of Jude. Oh, yeah, because what was interesting about this this 3rd space flight is that the one girl that was in it, she actually, um, was from St. Jude Hospital. She used to be a patient there, and then they were raising money for St. Jude's Hospital. And so I'm like, okay, we need to look at the Book of Jude and see what it says. And it's very last days stuff. Um, so, and I didn't even put everything in here that connects to the last days because it would take a while to cover that all. But it says, Beloved, while I was making every effort to write you about our common salvation, I felt the necessity to write to you, appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all handed down to the saints. For certain persons have crept in unnoticed, those who were long beforehand marked out for this condemnation, ungodly persons who turn the grace of our God into licentiousness and deny our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so like Trump and Biden and their followers, you think maybe are these certain persons that crept in unnoticed? Okay. Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe. Okay, definitely a very strong last days message. Okay. And angels who did not keep their own domain but abandoned their proper abode, he is kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Okay, powerful. I mean, is that not a 9/11 picture right there? So I highlighted the verse about angels who did not keep their own domain but abandoned their proper abode. He is kept in eternal bonds under darkness for judgment of the great day. Okay. Um, and so this could connect to Trump and his followers that, right now God has them kept in eternal bonds. Okay, remember the story about the restrainer? He's restraining the man of lawlessness. Um, you know, um, until he lets, until the restrainer moves out of the way, and then the man of lawlessness goes and causes destruction. Um, and so what I see is, I think these angels that were released, the 4 angels that were released, are a picture of, Trump and his followers being released, for their final chance of, you know, living their sin to the fullness. So I was kind of looking at 1335 here on this slide, because I was wondering if 1 connects to Trump's deal of the century, and then we have the Jews fasting. Okay, so in the book of Ruth, she talks about um, Jews fasting for 3 days, and then her and her maidens fasting for 3 days. So does the 1 connect to the deal of the century? And so we had, Israel fasting and judgment for, the deal of the century for 18 months. We had America, I mean, the time frames were happening at the same time. America had their 18 months um, of judgment for the deal of the century. And then, do we move into number 5, which, could connect to the time of the Messiah? It also could connect to the dividing of time. And then that's when we see Esther goes into the king. Okay, so Esther going into the king is that Trump returning for half a week. Esther says, if I perish, I perish. That connects to Samson saying, let me die with the Philistines. They look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days. The the two witnesses' dead bodies for 3.5 days. So what did I write in here? Okay, Daniel 9:27. He shall make a strong covenant with the many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Okay, so what I'm wondering is the strong covenant with the many for 1 week, is that God allowed Biden to have approximately 7 months. His 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 actual 8th month happened on the 19th, yesterday, or I don't know what day this is. So 2 days ago was the eighth month of Biden, but he's basically had like 7 months, you know, um, plus a few days or whatever to just do all this destruction. And then it says, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So does that connect to Trump returning for half a week to try to stop Biden from sacrificing Americans in Afghanistan? Like, because I'm wondering if that's going to be a motivating factor. I already know that it's a motivating factor for people wanting Trump to return. And saying that Biden should be impeached. Okay. Because then it says on the wing of abominations. Okay, so Trump returns when Biden does the abomination that causes desolation. Okay. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate. Okay, so Trump's going to come and he's going to cause destruction. Okay, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Okay, until we just gets a very short time. And then God brings judgment. Then then Trump's tower falls. Okay. Here's the story of Samson. They made him stand between the two pillars. And then Samson says, let me die with the Philistines. Okay, so what did I write in here? Okay, so about 3,000 men and women were on the roof looking on while Samson was amusing them. Okay, so I was wondering if that was people laughing about the Justice for J6 rally. Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Okay, so 2 eyes connects to the two witnesses, and like I said, I believe that the two witnesses are Trump and Netanyahu. So they both lost power, okay, but is God going to allow both Trump and Netanyahu to return, to complete the fullness of their sins? So then what I'm wondering is that as Trump's trying to, push down the two pillars, okay, if that, he ends up dying in the battle against Biden and his peeps. I mean, I definitely think we're going to see Trump's followers, I believe Trump's going to say something that's going to start the Civil War. And it's going to get his followers to return and start fighting with the Biden followers. Okay. And, so definitely at least his followers are going to fall. So I'm not exactly sure what causes Trump to die, but obviously very highly possible connected to this Civil War. And then it's interesting because it says Samson bent with all his might, so that connects to the lady who was bent for 18 years. And then what's interesting is, oh, my highlighter star got moved to the wrong position. Um, I was trying to highlight, then it says, thus he had judged Israel 20 years. Okay, so I thought that was really significant. That could connect to the 20 years after 9/11. Um, so definitely very interesting. C of Obama, C of Trump. We want to be in the middle with Messiah, no lies. We want to be quiet, follow laws, wear masks, stay outside of Babylon. Um, we read about the great city being split into three parts. Okay, so this is what I believe are the three parts. I mean, the C of Obama / Biden. I should have wrote in there. And then, okay, so what did I write here? So what I believe is that the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come," and I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and with the wild beasts of the earth. Okay. So I was wondering if the name Death connects to Biden, okay, and that Hades following connects to Trump, okay. Um, um, and then, because this is when we're reading about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And so what I believe is that the first horse, the white horse, where he's going around conquering and, he has a sword and goes around conquering, that could connect to Netanyahu, okay? And then the second horse connects to Obama, and the third horse, okay, we'll read about that, connects to Trump. Okay, and it says, when he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. Okay. So that connects to the Babylon merchants buying and selling. What's interesting with the two, you have the two scales, okay? So they kind of could look like 11s, and so you kind of have two 11s, okay? Because remember we saw 22 showing up a lot connected to Trump, okay? Anyway, so then we have the fourth rider would connect to Biden, but it's like, Trump is still, he's still following with Biden, okay? He hasn't conceded the election. He's still, hanging around like he's the president, okay? And that would connect to the harlot that rides on the beast, okay? Like Trump gets attention when Biden does bad things, because then they're like, well, what does Trump say about it? And Trump says bad stuff about Biden and his, um, you know, um, administration, other people in his administration. And so they're given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. So the wild beasts can connect to the Civil War. And then I brought in these verses from Revelation because I think the fifth angel sounded, and then there was locusts released, and so I think those could connect to the Black Lives Matter protester rioters. Let's see. Yeah, locusts upon the earth. They have his king over them. the angel of the abyss, his name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek he has the name Apollyon. Then the sixth angel, so, fifth connects to Obama, the fifth king. Trump is the sixth king. Then the sixth angel. Oh, what's interesting about what it says about the sixth angel? It says, then, okay, one saying to the angel who had the sixth angel who had the trumpet. Okay, so I thought that was interesting because it doesn't say that about the fifth angel. It just says, then the fifth angel sounded. But the sixth angel talks about it having a trumpet. So this is where you have release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates, and the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released so that they would kill a third of mankind. Okay, so a third of mankind could actually connect to, it talks about the great city being divided into three. And then I wrote about them being bound by their deluding influence that they're under. Because, maybe the Great River connects to Trump, but also the Great River could connect to Biden. I mean, the Euphrates is the fourth river, but then if you start out with the first river being Netanyahu, the second river connecting to, this comes from Genesis, the second river connects to Obama, the third river, the Tigris, connects to Trump, and then the Euphrates connects to Biden. So these angels are bound at the Euphrates. Right now, Biden is restraining them, until he's taken out of the way. So that's that. The 9th of Av, that, is kind of like 9/11 on the Hebrew calendar. And that's when the holy temples were destroyed. But I wanted to read this part about it. Yet the 9th of Av is also a day of hope. The Talmud relates that Mashiach, the anointed one, the Messiah, was born at the very moment that the temple was set aflame and the Galut began. Okay. So I thought that was very prophetical. Okay. Because I really believe when we see the civil war break out is when we're going to see the Messiah come. Okay. So let's see. Okay, this is the verses where we see a widow to the age of 84. Yeah, so 9/11 ended up being the 84th week after the deal of the century, so that was definitely interesting. Let's see. Okay, and then we have the tropical depression Mindy. Okay, so I put this in here. This is more a picture of Rosh Hashanah. Because tropical depression Mindy. Okay, so what was interesting about Mindy, it was the 13th named storm. Okay. Mindy means love or honey. So it was formed on September 7th. It hit on September 8th. Okay, so September 7th was the first day of Rosh Hashanah. September 8th was the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah on the Hebrew calendar is a time of blowing. That's when we read the binding of Isaac. What's interesting about when the Jewish people blow the shofars, they have 3 different types of shofar sounds. Okay. And so I think that could connect to who you're going to listen to, Trump, Biden, or Messiah. Okay. When they blow their trumpets. Okay. So anyway, so I just kind of showed this picture of Mindy's projected path. And then I think, um, they were even projecting it to go out even on 9/11, on Saturday, 9/11. Um, Definitely interesting. Then we had Hurricane Nicholas was happening on September 14th. It hit Texas with very heavy rain. What was interesting about St. Nicholas is they called it the sixth hurricane of the 2021 season. Um, you know, I don't totally know how, because Mindy was the 13th name storm, but then this was St. Nicholas was considered the sixth hurricane of the season. I mean, I guess it's because it's like the sixth one that was considered a hurricane by the time it hit um, land. Um, but what I was wondering with Hurricane Nicholas, I mean, at first I was excited because I was like, ooh, I think that's a picture of the Messiah. But then I was remembering, oh, wait, Nicholas would kind of connect to like St. Nicholas, which would connect to Santa Claus. And Santa Claus could be kind of like a picture of like the false Messiah. Um, Santa Claus would be like the one who gives you gifts, um, which could kind of remind you of Biden, you know, and or Trump. Um, but anyway, so this hurricane hit with heavy rain. Um, so definitely interesting. On September 14th. Okay, excuse me. Um so I was wondering if, okay, so what was interesting in Genesis 7:11, we read about, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open and the floodgates of the sky were opened. Okay, so that's kind of interesting because I was wondering if that was connecting to 917. Um, and so I was wondering, like, in the second month, if that could connect to the second time of Trump. Um, but, I'm wondering if, so the 17th happened after the day after Yom Kippur. So did God start opening, is he starting to open up the fountains of the great deep and the floodgates of the sky to allow Trump to return? And so what was kind of interesting is, like I said, the 17th was when, we started hearing. I mean, they actually told people for the G7 rally, to start showing up on the 17th. Um, so that was kind of interesting. So, is God starting to release Trump's followers? Um, what's interesting on 917 is that the Jewish people, it's the day after Yom Kippur, so they start working on their sukkah, their booth, their tabernacle for the Feast of Sukkot. Okay, so we kind of saw that where the Trump followers were starting to build their booth, with Trump, you know. Um, so I think also too, March 17th, 2 months after the deal of the century, we also had a flood type, um, picture happen with, that was when we had the 50th state with COVID, and then the shutdown was the next day. So, kind of like the fountains of the great deep burst open on that day with COVID. Okay. I mean, I think prophecies, God always has multiple fulfillments. Okay. Um, so why 9/11? Okay, so what do we see in Scripture? Genesis 11:9 talks about, um, Babel. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. Okay, this could kind of connect to God confusing the Trump followers, making them think he's a messianic figure with his quote unquote peace deals. Okay. Um, but then God's going to scatter them over the face of the whole earth. Um, and then Jeremiah 9:11 says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. And so I know like people wonder why I would consider Jerusalem America and then Judah would be Israel. Um, you know, and so I just kind of see like there are a lot of verses where we kind of have Jerusalem mentioned and then Judah's mentioned. And so it kind of doesn't make sense that you would need to mention Judah, um, at the same time that you're mentioning Jerusalem, And, so that's why I think it's a possible prophetic shadow where Jerusalem is, I see a lot about Jerusalem and then Mount Zion. Okay, so I think Jerusalem is a prophetical, the God's prophetically talking about America, and then with Mount Zion, he's prophetically talking about Israel and the Jewish people over there. Um, so God says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins. Okay, so that could connect to America. Haunted jackals, that could be a picture of the rioters. Okay. And then God says, I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. So the destruction of Israel could be even more destructive than what happens in America. Because I actually think that they could end up, getting, uh, you know, nuclear nuked by Iran. Um, even though I think, I mean, I don't totally know how it works, but we saw with their last war, they had both the war going on, but they also had civil war in the cities. Okay, because we had um, the Arabs were fighting against the Jews, and the Jews were fighting against the Arabs in the cities while this war was going on. Okay, so I don't know if that's kind of a foretaste of what's coming to Israel, and then I'm wondering if January 6th is kind of a foretaste of what's coming to America. And then, okay, so then we read in Revelation 11 about when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Revelation 11:9 says, those from the people and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Um, so that's what I think we are in the season fulfilling these verses. So we had Trump and Netanyahu, God considered that he was going to finish, he was going to decide that they were done with their testimony, their false signs and false peace deals and stuff like that. And so we had Biden, came out of the abyss and overcame Trump in the election. And then we had very similar in Israel, where the people on the left, they actually, there was actually, one group of people on the right and then some people on the left that they made a coalition deal, and voted to get Netanyahu kicked out. But what's interesting is it says those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their dead bodies to be laid in the tomb. Okay, so we definitely see that very clearly in America, where there is a strong group of people that refuse to admit that Trump lost the election, and so they're actually saying he's still president. Okay, um, and I think something similar could be happening in Israel with Netanyahu. Okay, I mean, definitely Netanyahu's not allowing himself to be laid in a tomb. He's still, he still talks about coming back. Um, and then, so what I'm wondering is the 3.5 days connects to 3.5 months after the coalition deal knocked Netanyahu out. That was June 2nd. 3.5 months later brings us to September 16th, okay? Which was Yom Kippur, okay? And so that's definitely very interesting. Um, you know, you know. So like I said, I'm wondering if on Yom Kippur, then God, decided, who the, who's going to die and which of the goats are going to die and which of the goats are going to live. Okay. And then Revelation 9:11 is when we read about the locusts. Um, it's possible because the locusts have two names that it does connect to Trump followers and Biden followers. Possible. Um, and then Daniel 9:11 says, excuse me, indeed, all Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, not obeying your voice. So the curse has been poured out on us, along with the oath which is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, for we have sinned against him. Okay, so, sometimes in Christianity, they kind of throw out the Old Testament. I mean, even the name, they, think it's not relevant anymore. But if you read about the blessings and the curses in the first 5 books in Deuteronomy, I believe we are currently living under the curse. Okay, and Jesus actually says, when you see the blessing and the curse, or wait, maybe it says that in Deuteronomy. But anyways, when you see the blessing and the curse, then we're supposed to know that we're in the last days. Okay. Oh, yeah, it actually comes from Deuteronomy. God says when you see the blessing and curse, being lived out. Like basically right now what we're seeing is that we're seeing the curses happening, but we're seeing kind of more like God's enemies are being blessed. Okay, so that would be like the blessing and the curse happening right now. And so we want kind of a reversal of that. Okay, and so God says when you see that, we're supposed to turn back to God is what we're supposed to do, because the reason why the curse came on is because we didn't obey God. We didn't obey God's voice. Okay, so I wanted to finish talking about these verses. So then, what we see, okay, I read up to the point of verse 10 where it says they send gifts to one another. Oh, and sending gifts to one another connects to Biden, how he's like, wanting, well, first of all, he sent the gifts to the Taliban, and, and then, he's wanting to pass all these huge deals that cost lots of money, to, give gifts to, all the people in the country. I mean, basically, he's trying to bankrupt America, to give gifts to, whatever, whoever benefits from his things that he's trying to pass. And then, okay, so then it says after the 3.5 days, so is that after the 3.5 months after Netanyahu lost his power? It says the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." Then they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake. A tenth of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. Okay, so we've seen a lot of people use these verses to say, um, okay, when they hear a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here," a lot of people think that's Jesus saying, "Come up here," like in the rapture. Okay, but what I'm wondering is if that connects to Lucifer, who tries to build his um, throne in the heavens. Okay, and I think I have that verse coming up. Um, and so what I think is that we have Trump and Netanyahu, like they're setting themselves up as the messianic figures, and then they're saying to their followers, "Come up here with me, as I, you know, rule as a messianic figure." Um, but they're not the true Messiah. Okay, and so, you know, um, someone. I think we can expect to see that happen really soon. Um, and so what's interesting, it says they went up to heaven in the cloud, and so I connect the cloud to the deluding influence that God allows to come on these people. Okay, because you know how clouds kind of block things. You can't see things. You can't see the sun. You can't see Jesus because of this cloud. Okay. Um, and then it says, in that hour, which hour is the hour of judgment, there was a great earthquake, and a tenth of the city fell. That could be a picture of the 10 horns, which I connect to BLM, but then I think Trump has his 10 horns that are similar to BLM that also riot. Um, So, and this time instead of 3,000, we have 7,000 people were killed. And so that's considered the second woe. And then the third woe coming quickly, I think, is Jesus with his judgments, or the rest, the final judgments that he brings. Okay, this is the verse that I was telling you about. Okay, so come up here. I think it connects to. So this is from Isaiah 14. It says, "You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, how the oppressor has come to an end, how his fury has ended, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Saffron. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Okay? Um, so that's what I'm thinking the "come up here" might connect to, is that because the king of Babylon, said in his heart, I will ascend to the heavens. And so then he's calling his followers. And so I think that could be Trump and Netanyahu, what we're going to be seeing them do. Okay. And then all hell's going to break loose, right? So what was interesting, another 9/11 sign was 1 month before 9/11, on August 11th, I think. Sicily may have recorded Europe's highest temperature in modern history, and it was 119 degrees. Okay. And what was interesting is they talk about the Lucifer and the anticyclone, connected to this. So definitely a very interesting sign. Okay, so we are in the Feast of Booths. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to point out about the Feast of Booths is that, I talked about it being a 7-day feast. Okay, but it actually sort of has 9 days. Okay. The seventh day is called Hoshana Rabbah, which means save us. Okay. And then we have the 8th day is called Shemini Azarith, which is the 8th day of assembly. It's considered a solemn day. Really, there's not too many traditions connected to that day. But the next day, day 9, is considered Simchat Torah, which is when you're celebrating the joy of the Torah. Okay. And so what I see is it's so what I'm wondering is, does day 7 connect to the 7th king? And so, like I said, Biden is the 7th king, because are we saying during Biden's time? So I think it partly connects to, I think, we kind of like maybe the first month doesn't really count for Biden. Like maybe he didn't really get things revved up until like after his first month. But then he did 7 months of, you know, true damage to things. I don't totally know. Um, but I definitely think 7 connects to him, because Biden is the 7th king. Okay, so but definitely during his time, we had Americans saying, "Save us, Lord," from Biden. Okay. And obviously the Trump followers are saying that too. And then the 8th day, so the 8th day, they consider it the 8th day of assembly. And so is that when um, Trump and then, Biden, is that when they gather their followers for this, big assembly, this big rioting war kind of thing that happens, the civil war that happens in America? Okay, because like I said, it's like a solemn day, and so does that connect to the 8th king who returns, who's one of the 7? Who I'm wondering if that connects to Trump. I mean, it could also connect to Obama. Maybe we see him come and be a part of this war. You know, and like I said, it could also connect to Netanyahu too returning. Okay, so we'll just have to see how it plays out. And then the 9th day, since we believe that Jesus is the Word, Simchat Torah, it has very strong shadows, messianic shadows, because the Jewish people take their Torahs out of the ark and they celebrate with them. They have a big party and stuff, and so I wonder if that connects to, is a picture of, you know, God's going to bring Jesus out of the ark, to his people, and then we're going to celebrate and stuff. Okay, so definitely a connection to the Messiah. Also, what's interesting about the Feast of Booths is that it's um, the booths that the Jewish people build. So they build, they either call them booths or sukkahs, or tabernacles. Well, tabernacle might be more like a Christian word. Um, and then they live in them for 7 days during the Feast of Booths. Um, and what's interesting about it is that they consider the Feast of the Booths kind of connect to like a harvest booth, where the harvester lives in his booth during the time of harvest, so he's right there with his harvest. Okay, so that's definitely a messianic shadow, where Jesus talks about the harvest being the end of the age, and so what I believe is that, the Sukkot picture is a picture of, Jesus being in his booth while he's harvesting, um, God's people, basically. Um, and then gathering God's people. So what's interesting this year is that you could consider September 15th to the 21st a type of Sukkot. Um, with the Gregorian calendar dates. Um, Because what's interesting about the 21st is that September 21 is called the International Day of Peace, and Biden's actually going to the UN on that day, which is today right now, to talk, So I'm sure he's going to do some big peace and safety thing. And what's interesting though too is we read in the scriptures, we read about them like basically celebrating the feast like twice. Um, in various accounts. Um, so we have, kind of this 15 and 21 on the Gregorian calendar, and then we have the actual Feast of Booths on the Hebrew calendar, which is September 21st to September 27th. So yeah, so what I wrote on here, the real Sukkot. September 21st to September 27th. So the 8th day of that Sukkot would be September 28th. The 9th day would be Simchat Torah, or 929 Simchat Torah, which is interesting because 929, you have 9 shows up twice in that date. And it actually looks like 9/11 because it's 9, and then you take the 29, and that looks like an 11. So that's kind of interesting. So I don't really know, if with Sukkot, if this is just a picture that God's showing us, and so the Jesus doesn't necessarily have to show up on the Feast of Booths. Sometimes God, maybe he paints the picture and maybe it would happen later. I don't know. The thing for me though is like I would be surprised that we go much further into October because, well, like I said, I think Biden's running out of time. And then also too, I think if you move into October, you're getting closer to more of an 11-year tribulation period. And I really think the tribulation period's only 10 years. Because we're up to like, what, 10 years, 11 months on September 28th. So that's why I'm expecting stuff to happen soon. So excuse me. I don't know why my nose has to run when I'm doing a video, but anyways, spiritual warfare. So what is very interesting about Sukkot is that Sukkot Eve is 9 months, 11 days after Hanukkah Eve. Okay, so that is where I come up with 9/11 connected to Sukkot. Okay. And so what's interesting is that you would have the first day of Sukkot, 9/21/21, would be 9 months, 11 days after Hanukkah, day 1. And then the second day of Sukkot would be 9 months, 11 days after Hanukkah, day 2, all the way through the 8th day of Sukkot. 9/28/21 would connect to 9 months, 11 days after Hanukkah, day 8. Okay. So when God says we don't know the day or the hour, this could be why. It's like, well, I could kind of see it happening almost on any day of Sukkot. And then we even have on 9/29 even kind of looks like a 9/11. And so what's interesting to me about that is that we read in Hosea, when he's listing the dates, he actually lists Hanukkah Eve as one of the dates that he lists. When he's kind of giving warnings about the last days. I think it's actually mentioned twice. Okay. Maybe even more. Because he kind of just talks about the 24th. Oh, so I put it in here. Haggai. Oh, is that what I said? Anyways, this is from the book of Haggai. Haggai 2, 18 and 20. It says, "Do consider from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month." Okay, that is Hanukkah Eve. "From the day when the temple of the Lord was founded, consider," and then he gives you a bunch of stuff to consider. And then he goes on to say in verse 20, "Then the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, saying," okay, so he doesn't list the 9th month in verse 20. He just lists um, the 24th day, so that, does that connect to like September 24th? We see in the book of Daniel where it talks about Daniel was mourning for 21 days, and then on the 24th he has kind of this like sort of a messianic encounter. um and plus I wonder about 24 connecting to like, where we had Trump is 666, but then for his second, um his return, does 24 connect to that? Because then do you have 6666 four times? Okay, six four times, um which adds up to 24. So that's what I'm wondering. um but then we have in oh okay, so then in Matthew, um we see the transfiguration actually connects to the feast of Sukkot. Okay, so it says 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother. Okay, so that would be four people that would connect to the four angels, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves, which connects to, the king of Babylon, putting himself up on a mountain. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground and were terrified. So in one of the other accounts, it actually talks about Peter not knowing what he's talking about. So what I'm wondering is, the 3 tabernacles, does that connect to the tabernacles for, okay, so are people building a tabernacle for Obama, a tabernacle for Trump, and a tabernacle for Biden? Or like Obama, Biden is one, Trump is one, and then Messiah is another. Because I kind of think, with the city being divided into 3 parts, we're at the point where, the terrors have grown up and sort of built their own tabernacles that don't include Jesus. Okay. What's interesting about Peter wanting to build 3 tabernacles is that Peter is the one that denied Jesus 3 times. Okay. And so what I'm wondering is that if the denying Jesus 3 times connects to the 3 time frames of Obama, Trump, and Biden, were those testing times to see if we're going to deny Jesus during those times and follow these, presidents like like our messianic figure, or are we going to hold out till the end, like the angel tells Daniel to, waiting for Jesus? Okay. What's interesting about the beast from the earth is the 666, that some translations translated 616. So I thought that was interesting because 616 actually adds up to 13. And so the 666 could connect to Trump, whereas the 616 could connect to Obama and Biden. So are we almost out of time? there was okay, so there was one last thing I wanted to add. I didn't make a slide for this, but we read about the Feast of Tabernacles in John 9. Okay. So one other day, so I've been kind of looking at, I mean, no one knows the day or the hour, but I've been kind of wondering about the seventh and the 8 days of, like um the 8 day would be September 22nd for the first kind of Sukkot type week on the Gregorian calendar. So is something going to happen on that day? And then do we see Jesus show up on September 23rd? Or are we going to see something, gathering happen on September 28th, which is the 8th day of the actual Sukkot? And on the Hebrew calendar, and then do we see Jesus show up for the 29th, Simchat Torah? But then in John, okay, so those are dates that I'm looking at. I don't know. But then another thing that throws a wrench in the thing is that we read about, see, this is kind of confusing to me because in John, okay, so I'm trying to find this in John 9. Is it John 9 or John? Oh, where is it? Okay. Okay. So I don't think it's in the book of. Okay, so we read about the Feast of Tabernacles in the book of John, and okay. Of course, I can't find it. Let's see here. I must have to back up here. Okay, I do. Okay. So it wasn't John 9, it is John. Sorry. Hang in there. Let's see. Lord, please help me. Because I'd like to teach about this. I'll have to do it from memory because a cloud is hiding this word for me. I can't find it. So what we read about in the book of John is during the Feast of Tabernacles. It talks about Jesus coming up in the like first it talks about him coming up secretly to the feast. Okay, so that actually could connect to like kind of this hidden Gentile feast. Okay, and then we have Jesus coming in the midst of the feast to start teaching. Okay, and so what I was wondering is, okay, and the reason why I was thinking about this is in the midst of the feast, is that when we see Trump return? Because the 24th, September 24th, I talked about the significance of the 24, where Daniel has kind of that false messianic encounter on the 24th. So that would be the midst of, the Jewish Sukkot. Okay. It's the 4th day of Sukkot, so that would be the middle of the week. Okay, is that when Trump returns? Okay, because it's also the 18th of the month, which connects to the fall of Babylon. Because the reason why I started looking at this is because I was doing some calculating, and so this is very interesting. On the 24th, okay, where's my chart for the 24th? Okay, so on the 24th day, when I was doing my calculating, so on Hanukkah, in the middle of Hanukkah was 12/14/2020. Okay. That is actually the middle of the Great American Solar Eclipse. So if you know that there was a solar eclipse in, I think it was 2017 on August 21st, and then there's going to be another solar eclipse coming 7 years later or something like that. then the middle of those two solar eclipses ended up being 12/14/2020. Okay. Which happened right in the middle of Hanukkah. And then what was interesting is that was the day of, one of the electoral college vote. But it was also the first day of the vaccines. So a very interesting day. Okay. So then I told you that all the dates of Hanukkah, are 9 months, 11 days from their corresponding day. Okay. So then 12/14 for Hanukkah connects to 9/24 for Sukkot. Okay. Um, and so what's interesting about that day is that it's actually 9 months after Christmas. And it is, let's see, it would be the 10 years, 11 months after the day I consider the Great Tribulation, or the Tribulation to start, which I thought started on 10/25/2010. It's 12 months, 6 days from last year's Rosh Hashanah, which is kind of interesting because that connects to, okay, you know how Trump, declared that he was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem on December 6th. So that's kind of interesting. It's okay. 9/24 is 11 months, 22 days from Sukkot of last year. Okay, which is, remember Trump had COVID. Okay. So you got that 11 number, you got the 22 number there. So that's interesting. Okay, so these other two numbers to me are really interesting. It's 606 days after Trump's deal of the century. And then it's 66 weeks and 6 days after Trump's birthday in 2020. Okay. After June 14th, 2020. Okay. So definitely very interesting. So that's what got me started thinking about this date. But then we do read that it goes on to say, that Jesus on the last day, the great day of the feast, so maybe what we see is like Trump show up, and then we got like 1, 2, 3 days of darkness. I mean, the timing doesn't quite move like, well, I don't know. Then maybe we see Jesus show up on Hoshana Rabbah. Um, I don't really know. So, I was kind of looking at, well, what if Trump shows up on the 24th and then Jesus shows up on the 29th, but that doesn't give you 3 days of darkness, and then Jesus shows up, the 3 days of darkness would be like 24th, 25th, 26th, and then maybe you see Jesus show up on Hoshana Rabbah. I don't know. And then maybe you have like 3 days of light, 27, 28th, and then you celebrate Jesus on Simchat Torah. Because you do have on Simchat Torah where, they take the Torah out of the ark. So that could be a picture of Noah coming out of the ark. So maybe by then, by the 29th, God's enemies are, fairly cleaned up so that God's people can come out. Who knows? I have no idea. I mean, these are just the pictures as I see them. How they're going to play out, we don't know, because we see in part and we prophesy in part. But I just wanted to point these all out to you, and so we just kind of have to wait and see. Oh, the other thing that's significant too about Sukkot is that, well, on the on Sukkot Eve we had the harvest moon. Okay. So that was interesting. I don't know how often that happens. And then on September 22nd is the start of fall. Okay. And then they say on that day is when day and night are about equal. Okay. We do read in John 11, verse 9. Okay. You see that 9:11 there again. where, you know, Jesus talks about, um, you know, are there not 12 hours in a day or something like that? Um, you know, and then it talks about he stumbles because the light is not in him. Um, you know, so, you know, so I don't totally know what that would connect to, but that happens. That, you know, it does kind of connect to the 22nd. Um, so there we go. I think Jesus might be right at the door for Sukkot. Um, so we'll just have to see how things play out. You know, and so if, you know, there's 3 days of darkness before the Messiah shows up, you know, hang in there. You know, remember there's those verses that said, if you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. Um, you know, also, if you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you know, then her desolation is near. Um, you know, so you could look up those verses. You know, so I actually did a video, you know, for the 3 days of darkness, you know, so if you need some encouragement, those are, you know, that's a video you could listen to. Um, so a lot of information, I know, but hopefully, you know, um, hopefully you've been blessed by it. Hopefully it encourages you. Hopefully it helps you see that, you know, we're, um, you know, near the end of, you know, the tribulation period. That we're, you know, that Jesus is right at the door, that we are getting so close to seeing, you know, kind of the end of this all, is what I believe. I mean, I guess I would be really, 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 really surprised if it continued, but I kind of been saying this for 3 years. So, I just don't know, you know, but it just seems like, things are just really, I mean, it just, you know, I just would kind of be surprised if we get through the month of September and nothing happens, especially because, well, especially because the Hebrew, okay, so the Hebrew month that we're in is the seventh month, okay? Um, and, you know, so it kind of ends like the first week of October, okay? And so I guess I'd be surprised if we move into the eighth month. Um, anyways, but I don't know. I mean, you know, we just always have to like endure, you know, and be strong and be courageous, um, you know, and just wait until Messiah shows up. I mean, because yes, you know, weeping lasts for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And so it's so worth waiting for Jesus to show up. Okay. You know, but don't get in Trump's booth and don't get in Biden's booth. Okay. Or anyone else's booth. Just, you know, get in Jesus's booth. Okay. For the feast. Okay. Um, so I thank you so much for listening. I pray that you're blessed. I pray that God gives you endurance, you know, to hang in there until Messiah comes. You know, so thanks so much for listening. God bless.